Here we are. Hi, everybody, to all the Performance Lab fun. I'm here, and I'm really honored to be here with Michael Boyle. Well, there's nothing to say. I mean, everyone knows him, and it's an institution of our field. And you inspired a lot of us, and it's really something beautiful to be here to talk with you. And well, if you want to say something to our fans, just to present or to say hello, and then we can start. Michael Boyle.
Hello, and thanks for having me on. It's great that we've my book's been translated into Italian, and now I've lost track of the number of languages actually of the new one, and so it's amazing. I never had any anticipation of having worldwide reach like this, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah. It's beautiful. Your books has been one of my favorites, and one of my like the Bible of with which I started to work, and it's really great to be here. Okay, we are here just to talk about your methodology, your ideas about training, and just to I don't know how to say in English, but to know some curiosities we have. For example, in the first book, you haven't talked in a good way about stretching, and in the second one you just change idea about it. So I would like to know about what do you think after new functional training for sports, about stretching techniques, and how you develop it in your training, and how much importance you give it.
Well, it's interesting. So when I wrote that, the first book was 2004. So you're talking about now 16 years ago. And at that point in time, I had been, I think, very influenced, like everybody had. A lot of the research talked about how static stretching reduced power. And at that time, I think I was very typical of everybody else in that I read what other people told me instead of going back and reading what the original statements were. So there were all these coaches who were, very pro power development, Olympic lifting coaches, track and field coaches, whatever it was. And they reacted very strongly to the research that said, we're going to decrease power if we static stretch. So I just went along like everybody else did. And I think that's why I'm so vocal now about everything that way, in terms of go back, read the original research, talk to the people who had the original idea. Because what I found later was that a lot of my athletes started to have what I would call gradual onset injuries, back pain, hip pain, shoulder pain. And one of the things I did is I would always go to them, or I'd always go to the physical therapist with them. And I would watch the physical therapist evaluate them, and I would listen to what the physical therapist said. And almost every time they said they needed to stretch. And so I'm kind of sitting there thinking, wait a second, all the hurt people that I have need to stretch. Why don't I just have everybody stretch? Because it's like there's a lot more in this injury prevention piece. So, and that led me to look more, because again, people argued vigorously, your athletes aren't going to be as fast, your athletes aren't going to be explosive. And one of the things that I always say to people is that they talk about in professional sports, the number one ability is availability, right? You want to have somebody playing in the game, and I always give people the LeBron James example. Do you want LeBron playing or not playing? And everybody's like, of course you want him playing. And I'm like, so does it matter to you that he might not be quite as powerful or quite as explosive? And they said, no, we just want him in the game. I'm like, that's the most basic underlying point. Then you look deeper into the research, and what I realized when I looked at the research was that this decrease in power that we talked about was somewhere in the 5 to 7% range. Now you start putting that into numbers, and you said, okay, let's use 5% because it's easier to round off. if we said someone's got a 30-inch vertical jump, well, 5% would be 1.5 inches. So now you're looking at someone and saying, oh, 28 and a half, 30. Does that really matter? You know, again, LeBron playing healthy, 28 and a half vertical jump. LeBron injured, limping around, 30-inch vertical jump. I'm taking LeBron healthy with the 28 and a half inch vertical jump. That's the way we're going to win more games. So I started looking at that. Then you start looking at the research again, one level deeper, and you start to realize that the way these studies were done, these reduced power studies, were things like do a vertical jump, do 4 minutes of static stretching, go over, do another vertical jump. I started to look at that and think, wow, I'm amazed it only went down 5%. Because, I mean, obviously we know that, and that's one of the things I said in the book, stretching is not preparation for exercise. Stretching is long-term injury prevention. It's part of the preparation for exercise process, but it's not the only process. So I guess, and that's what's really funny, is people say, oh, you change your mind on stuff. And I always laugh at them because I think, yeah, of course I do. That's called learning. Changing your mind is learning. If you don't change your mind, there's a problem. If you are here, I always say, and you know, people have put the quote up, but it's like, I always said, if you're doing the same program you were doing 10 years ago, either you were very good 10 years ago, or you suck right now. You know what I mean? Because it's either or. Like, you shouldn't be doing the same things you were doing 10 years ago. And so there's why I said I can always give a long answer to a short question.
No, but I appreciate it, and I appreciated a lot the question. I mean, the fact you talk about the literature and how the studies were made. So that's probably the first error, that the first mistake that makes us thinking that the stretching is wrong. And no, yeah,
And
but
sorry, let me interrupt. The second mistake is not realizing that people have agendas, and that there's people, and you know, sadly in the research world, there's a lot of people with agendas. There's a lot of people who want, I'm going to do this research to prove my point. I don't believe there are enough truly independent researchers, people who are out there saying, I'm going to do this, and I'm going in with this true, well, I think it's null hypothesis is what they call it. Like this idea, like I don't have an opinion either way. I just want to see what happens. In the strength and conditioning world, and the other thing that people do in the strength and conditioning world is they accumulate research, and I do the same thing, so I'm just as guilty. They accumulate research that supports their point of view.
Yeah.
So I'm always looking for more studies on unilateral training so I can say to people, look, here's another study showing you unilateral training is better than bilateral training. So I'm as guilty of that as the next person, but you have to realize that everybody has an agenda, whether they say they do or they say they don't.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the second thing I would like to ask you is about your point of view. Well, we knows it, but your point of view about weightlifting movements in sports prep. I mean, here in Italy, so this is the difference, the main difference with you in the US. We are not so, you know, we're not sort of okay with the weightlifting movements. We don't know. We think it's wrong. And well, I mean, I think the first problem is that strength conditioning coaches are the first one not able to do it in a good way. But this is my point of view. And the second one is that athletes are not prepared in where they are young to learn and to do it in a good way when they are adults. But what do you think about weightlifting movement adapted to maybe to the difference of the sports and their important in sports prep?
And when you say weightlifting movements, do you mean Olympic lifting, like Olympic weightlifting, or
Yeah,
just lifting?
sorry, Olympic weight. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I love Olympic weightlifting movements, but I think, and this is the problem. So you look at Italy and you think, all right, probably number one sport soccer, number two sport basketball, right? I mean, would that be fair?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're not high absolute strength level sports. And I think what ends up happening a lot of times, particularly when you import American strength and conditioning, whether you like it or not, you tend to be importing American football strength and conditioning. And when basketball, even in this country, when basketball coaches or soccer coaches see what they perceive to be American football strength and conditioning, they immediately put the hand up, stop. I don't want to see my athletes, doing power cleans. I don't want to see my athletes doing back squats. I don't want to see my athletes doing bench presses, because they associate all of us with American football strength and conditioning. I wrote an article a couple months ago called "Are We Too Influenced by American Football?" And I think, and even worse so, if you look at American football strength and conditioning, it's too influenced by powerlifting. So now you've got this trickle down of powerlifting to American football to everybody else. And it ends up in a situation where everything becomes demonized. So I would look at it and think, if I had soccer players and young basketball players, I would absolutely positively teach them to Olympic weightlift. It would be one of the first things that I would teach them to do when they were young. I love it. It's coordinated. It's force absorption. There's so much good stuff to it. The problem becomes when we try to make Olympic weightlifters out of athletes. There's a Dennis Logan quote, one of the old Exos guys that I love. And he said in the quote, "What we want are great athletes that are good weightlifters." What we end up doing as coaches a lot of times is we try to make good athletes into great weightlifters. We've got to look at the fact first and say their number one priority is their sport. And number two priority then might be the strength and conditioning process. So I'm a huge fan. I think it has a really big place. I think if you went to a Series A team and started inserting Olympic weightlifting into the training program, you'd probably be unemployed really quickly. Someone would get you fired. So I think you've got to be able to look at the audience, and even if I think this is a really good idea, there's going to be a period of time, a build up for this over time. And that time is years, not weeks, not months, for people to be able to accept this stuff. A kid walks in, or a parent walks in and sees their son learning to clean with a 15-pound aluminum bar. They're fine. Hey, that's great. But a soccer football coach, in Italy walks in and sees his best player trying to, hang clean 225 pounds. He has a heart attack. Like, what are you doing? You're going to kill my best guy. You're going to ruin my team. So I think we've got to be able to look at that stuff and realize that there are, I love weightlifting, but I also, and again, we're modified weightlifting. So we do two things. We hang clean above the knees. We hang snatch above the knees. And when we hang snatch, we close grip hang snatch. We do not snatch with a snatch grip. Because our goal, I want to use weightlifting movements to help my athletes. That's what I'm trying to do. I am not trying to make my athletes weightlifters.
Yeah. It's all about a coordinative perspective. So yeah, I agree with it. But
I'm actually it's too hot where I'm sitting, but we should be fine. Keep going. I'm just gonna walk with my computer.
Yeah.
Go ahead, keep going.
Okay. What about okay, we talk about coordinative approach and why you use weightlifting variation, Olympic weightlifting variations, but I don't know, a contrast we make about this perspective about using weightlifting movements is that sports is not about squat position, bipodalic position, but it's for the most part of the time on one leg and on the split position. So why I should teach hang clean or hang snatch while I don't have this position of the feet during the movement of sports. So
because I think what we have to remember is that we Olympic lift for power. That's why we're doing it. We're working on Olympic lifting for power production. We're not worried about the unilateral nature of it. I don't even look at it as a lower body exercise. I would look at it as Olympic lifting is for the nerves. Conventional strength training is for the muscles. And, so I want to look at this. I Olympic lift 1 for that neural effect. And I actually have to write that down because I'm rewriting my second book, and that's a pretty good point that I probably didn't make well in the original. But when we think about this, sorry, this happens a lot when I do these podcasts. I have to stop and make notes. But so when we think about this stuff, we have to realize, again, we go back to let's start with why idea. Simon Sinek. Why are we doing this? I'm Olympic lifting 1 to develop the nervous system. I'm Olympic lifting 2 because I think it's very coordinative, particularly for young kids. I think it's a great way to teach them. I'm Olympic lifting 3 because we're getting there's lots of muscle groups that are attacked. So when you start thinking, you've got grip, you've got traps, you've got shoulders, you've got all of your lower body musculature. So you are getting a muscular effect that goes on with it, and you're getting a very broad muscular effect. Then there's also, I think, like I said, the force absorption effect. I think that Olympic lifting is great for concussion prevention, for injury prevention in contact sports, because, I always say when you get a guy that can hang clean 300 pounds, that guy's going to be pretty good at absorbing a collision.
Yeah.
Because he's colliding with that bar and learning to absorb that force all the time. So I think there's a lot of benefits to it, but I think we have to look at it and realize we need to know why we're doing it. And it's, what's the tool and what's the job, and are we using the right tool for the job? And I think Olympic lifting is a really good tool as long as you know the job.
Yeah, of course. I totally agree with you, of course. Well, so here we're talking about, a specific, but I don't know that it's not a percent that is that way and then it can change, but probably it change also if we are talking about a young athlete and a senior one. But which do you think is the right percent about not specific training, not specific movements, and specific movement, specific training in sports in general, of course?
We don't do very much of what people would consider specific training. If you watched our strength and conditioning session,
yeah, I know. That's why I ask you.
very, very, very general. So I think I always said specific training is called practice. Most athletes get tremendous amounts of specific training. If you think again, if we go back to soccer in Italy, football in Italy, whatever you guys call it, they play a lot. And, even I argue with the soccer coaches a lot about doing more work without the ball, and they freak out. And I'm like, yeah, but you've got to be really fast without the ball, because most of the game is running to get the ball, not possessing the ball. And people are, people want, when you do sprints, we want to do sprints with the ball. I'm like, no, you don't want to do sprints with the ball. You need to sprint without the ball, because that ability to get to the ball is what controls the pace of the game. Yes, obviously you have to have ball skills when you now retrieve the ball, but if you're slow and you never get the ball, no amount of skill is going to save you. And so, I've been fighting that fight with soccer coaches for 20 years. Like, hey, let's just get out and do speed work without the ball. And it is like pulling teeth with soccer coaches. They just can't envision that there would ever be, they want to warm up with the ball. They want to do everything with the ball. And I'm like, let's just put the balls away for 10 or 15 minutes every day and work on, because again, if you look at soccer possession, I would say the average player on the field possesses the ball probably for, if you look and say, there's 22 guys on the field, you divide that into the amount of time. It's pretty darn low. and the reality is it's certain guys probably playing in the middle that are going to have it a lot more than others. Some guys, if you look at, if you're playing in the back row, you're just going to boom the ball out, boom the ball out, boom the ball out. It's that ability to win that ball that makes a big difference. So I think you're always going to be trying to educate coaches. I talk about, one of the things I always talk about over here is learning to speak coach. Learning to talk to the audience that you're going to talk to. And the other thing that happens when you talk about things like weightlifting movements, most of the strength and conditioning people come out of a strength or power, background. So they may have been a bodybuilder or an Olympic lifter or a power lifter or something like that. And they struggle to speak coach. They struggle. So one thing we try to do with our coaches is we're always looking for athletes to be coach, to be strength and conditioning coaches, because they relate much more. And if you look, it's a really good book called Rants of a Strength and Conditioning Madman by Kurt Hester, who's a American football strength and conditioning coach. But he kind of takes American strength and conditioning coaches to task a little bit by saying that, if you look at most of them look like they can't move. I always said, if you look like if you wanted to audition for the role of a refrigerator, then you might be doing the right type of training. But I want my coaches to look athletic. I want my coaches to be able to move, to be able to jump, to be able to demonstrate everything that I want our athletes to be able to do. I think that's critically important.
Yeah. But I understand this point of view, and well, it's something that in Italy it's hard to convince with, but I agree, and I'm a fan of this way of thinking of training, and so we are on the same line of thinking. Well, okay, he's being a really great conversation. It's really great to be with you. I'm just the last question I would like to ask you, and it's related to what we have talked about in the last seconds, and it's about the speed development. And at the same time, you talk about you make this example is running with a ball and running without the ball. Here in Italy, we are hard to understand, to believe that not specific speed training, or I mean, without the ball, without the game in the middle, it's wrong to develop speed and also metabolic conditioning in general. So what's your thinking about metabolic conditioning, speed training, and the same? Which is the right percent of
let's approach the speed training part first. I think across the world we're doing speed training wrong. And the number one thing, and I wrote an article, it started out, we put it on my strengthcoach.com site as a 3-part article, but it started out with as a one long, it's probably 4,000 words. It was way too long. But basically it was if you're not timing, you're not doing speed training. Because the one thing that we talk about with speed training is when people say, I want to get faster, then the first question is, okay, how fast are you? And if someone says, I don't know, it's like, all right, then we're going to have a real hard time proving that we got you faster. So what we've taken to doing now with our speed training is we run sprints twice a week. We go up to about 25 yards. We start out at 10. We move to 15 in what we would call a flying 10. So a 5-yard run up basically into a 10-yard sprint. We work into a flying 10 with a 10-yard run up, and eventually in the later stages of our off season, we work with a 15-yard run up. And we're trying to work on maximum velocity. And there's a lot of reasons. If you read the article series, there's a bunch of reasons why this is really important. The biggest thing is that when we think, people are so into this idea of velocity-based training room. You can't do anything in the weight room that comes remotely close to sprinting. Bad sprinting is about 8 meters a second. Really fast weightlifting is slightly under 2 meters per second. So if we look at value, one of the things I've talked to people about is we need to see sprinting as a tool, not as a test. I think we've always looked at sprinting as a test. We're gonna do all this work, and then we're gonna time you. We might time you every 6 months. I'm looking at it completely differently now and saying, no, the sprinting, and in the talk that I did, one of the things I did is I compared Carl Lewis and Ben Johnson. And Ben Johnson was, obviously banned for steroids, shorter, stockier, weightlifter. They constantly raved about his maxes and how much weight he could lift, all these things. Johnson was sort of perceived to be, or Lewis rather, was perceived to be not a weight room guy. Taller, lankier than Johnson. The interesting thing is They ran nearly identical times. And what I said to people is they ran nearly identical times because there was one big common denominator. They both do time sprinting. And I think you could look at the difference and say, you know, one guy's going about it one way, one guy's going about it in a very probably opposite way. They're both getting the same result. When we start doing the analysis, we look and say, what's the common denominator? The common denominator is sprinting. It's the same way I always say to people, go look up Usain Bolt strength training. Watch the videos.
Yeah.
They're awful. They're absolutely awful. He's doing, I mean, I would look at him and say 80% of what he does is wrong, from my opinion of strength training, right?
Of course.
Except for the fact that he is the fastest man in the world. So if somebody else could look and say, no, everything that he's doing is right, I would look at it and I'd still disagree. I'd say, no, everything he's doing is wrong. But because he's such a great sprinter, it doesn't matter. Sprinting, I put this in, sprinting is the holy grail. And if you look at like J.B. Morin's work, he's doing great work in France on sprinting. He wrote an article called Sprinting as a Vaccine, talking about the idea that literally running time sprints is like, you know, injecting your hamstrings with a vaccine that's going to prevent hamstring pulls. And because I think what happens in soccer is that a guy doesn't run full speed until he has to. The ball's in the air and it's a race for the 50-50 ball, and suddenly that guy realizes, okay, I am now going to access 100% of my capability, and boom, he grabs his leg.
Yeah.
He's never done that. He's not doing it in practice. He's not doing it in games unless he has to. Whereas we want to look at that and think, we're going to do that all the time, every week, twice a week. We're going to hit whatever that number is in terms of whether it's top speed or meters per second, however you want to look at it, we're going to access that number. So that's the speed part. The metabolic conditioning part, totally different. It's soccer, again, small-sided games. It's a big thing in soccer. And if I was a soccer coach and I was doing small-sided games, I would make some of them length of the field half the width. Because I think the problem with the small-sided game idea, I think it's a really good way to condition because it's very, very specific, but it's too short. You don't get the long runs that you need. And again, guys go out in the game, big pitch, and they get hurt in the long run. So I would look at it and think, you know, we're going to play small-sided games. One day I might divide the field in half down the middle. The other day I might divide the field in half lengthwise and force the guys to play with really narrow boundaries, but be able to get really long balls for guys to be able to go full speed. So I think I like the small-sided game. What I hate from a metabolic conditioning standpoint, I think distance running is the biggest waste of time. I think it's an injury production technique. Again, if you look at the data, something like 50% of males and 70% of females who take up distance running get injured. I don't know of anything else that we would do from a training perspective that could be so bad for you that people would advocate for on such a consistent basis. How's that?
Well, it's been like illuminating, and as I said, it's a honor to be with you, and now everybody has understand another time why you're here, why you are there, and why you are here to teaching us a lot of things. And I think you are, as I said, one of the biggest institution, and being here, have the possibility to have this conversation with you, talking like this to the themes we always like struggle about, and it's really a huge thing. So, well, okay, I don't want to steal you more time, and I say you goodbye from me and from all the Performance Lab fans. And well, of course, I wish that we will have the possibility to talk with you again in the future. And that, if you want to say something to say us along.
Thank you, and thank you to you for being persistent about getting me on. I know this wasn't easy for us to do, so thank you. Thank you for continuing to reach out and continuing to ask, because I do enjoy these conversations.
Yeah, okay. Goodbye. I stopped the recording.
Thanks.